Hello, now we welcome in Ella Brockway into the Minor Lounge. She's the game day editor at the Daily Northwestern, a senior there in Evanston, and also the president of the Association for Women in Sports Media, the Northwestern chapter. So Ella, welcome on.
Thanks so much for having me, Andrew. Really happy to be here.
Of course. How are you doing? I know it's kind of been an action-packed week, and with games and traveling back home. I think for you, how's it all? How's everything?
Yes, it's been an exciting week to say the least. I was at the game at Northwestern's game against Wisconsin on Saturday, and that was as exciting as everyone around the country saw it to be. It was exciting to be there in person. And now I am back home in New Jersey for the winter break. So have left the Midwest for the first time in 4 months, but kind of just staying home in quarantines now, but have a lot of football left to watch, so that's fun.
Sure. Yeah, do it a little bit remotely. Well, glad that you're back home. Glad that you're safe and healthy for the time being. Glad that football can still be played. I think Northwestern's really turned it into an art form of how successful they've been, not only on the field, but with managing the COVID tests and everything like that. But before we kind of jump into the game and whatnot, I think the most pressing question is just the Fightin Rece Davises that really blew up. From when Joey Galloway said it to then Coach Fitzgerald mentioning that in the press conference after the game. But between that time, when Joey Galloway made that statement on ESPN and Pat Fitzgerald, obviously mentioned that during the press conference and after the victory. What was that like? Was there a lot of hard feelings? Was it just laughed off? You're around the program. What were people saying about that comment?
Well, I remember sitting in the press box when the game had just ended and we were like watching one single screen and we heard Fitz say something about the Fightin Rece Davises and we were all like, where did that come from? And then it was kind of starting to blow up on Twitter and all of us in the press box were like, we're just hearing of this now. But so essentially you laid it out. Like Joey Galloway from ESPN on I think it was their college football playoff show, had likened Northwestern as a team athletically to a bunch of Fightin Rece Davises. And Northwestern senior receiver Kyrick McGowan was actually the first one to find that video and kind of share it with the rest of the team early in the week. Okay. Before the Wisconsin game. So that was kind of how it all spread. And there's a great video on Northwestern football's social media now that kind of shows all the players mic'd up throughout the week, and they were making a lot of jokes about it. So they definitely were using that as some form of motivation. I think now that the Wisconsin game is over, that joke definitely lasted throughout the weekend, and they were rolling with it throughout the weekend. But I think now that we're officially on to the next game, I think they're finally moving on from the Fightin Rece Davis or Fightin Rece Davis's moniker. I do know that the actual Rece Davis did Zoom bomb their team meeting yesterday morning, but I think that put a cap on the whole Fightin Rece Davis's saga for now.
Yeah, so you mentioned I think Riley Lees and some other people were kind of mic'd up during practice saying like, oh, hey, there's Rece Davis, hi Rece, how you doing? Did you hear why that how that came to be, or ask anybody about that during practices? You mentioned McGowan kind of shared that info with the team and then it kind of just blew up internally, or?
Yeah, I think it's an example of how this on a broader scale, I think it's just another example of how this Northwestern team feels as though, and this is the message that a lot of the players were giving in the press conference after Wisconsin, or after the win over Wisconsin, is that they had felt there was a lot of, even if not intentional disrespect in the way that the Joey Galloway comment came off, there was a lack of respect for a team or for Northwestern coming into this Wisconsin game and kind of underestimating how good this year's team actually is. And, a lot of the players in that post-game press conference were like, this wasn't an upset to us. We came in here expecting to win, even though, everything you saw after that game was Northwestern upset this team, or Northwestern upsets Wisconsin, when in reality, I think it's just this whole like the whole Fightin Rece Davis saga and what you saw on the mic'd up version of the videos of some of the wide receivers. I think that's just another example of Northwestern kind of trying to take this lack of national respect in stride and get some jokes out of it, yes, but also call for more national respect. I think that's what you saw from pretty much all of the players after the game on on Saturday. They were all kind of like, this is when the country needs to start paying attention. So I think the whole saga of the last three days has kind of showed that a lot.
Yeah, Coach Fitz definitely has a way of doing that. I think it was a few years back before they played Pitt in one of their bowl games. Danny Cannell had said, "Oh, I'm super confident that Pittsburgh's going to win," and put all my bowl mania confidence points on Pittsburgh. And Fitzgerald showed that video, that ESPN clip, to the team before that game. So he certainly has a knack for finding those doubters from the national media and motivating the team. But let's take me to Saturday. Take me to Ryan Field. That was your last game there as a student covering it. Obviously, what was that atmosphere like? Obviously, top 20 matchup, really, really big Big Ten implications, and Wisconsin hasn't had much success in Evanston and in this century. So take me to set the scene, if you will.
Yeah, so I've been to a bunch of games at Ryan Field over the last 4 years that I've been at Northwestern, and even though there weren't any fans in the stadium except for like a few hundred parents from both Wisconsin and Northwestern, I walked into that stadium and I felt like the energy, like I could feel a different energy in there. I was standing out like right in front of the sidelines about like 30 minutes before the game started with a bunch of other journalists who cover Northwestern, and we were all just like, maybe it was just the music playing or like the way we were watching Northwestern warm up on the field, but that was one of the most high energy pre-game experiences I felt at Northwestern. And I think that's what a lot of the players said coming in, that they knew how big this game was going to prove in terms of like ramifications for the Big Ten West, ramifications for the Big Ten as a whole, like now ramifications for the college football playoff. But you could feel the intensity and you could feel that all week, and it kind of culminated in that the pregame emotions that were just like flowing through the relatively empty Ryan Field that day. And then as the game started to go in, I think a lot of us had been, kind of unsure with what exactly to predict. We'd only seen Wisconsin play 2 games. Graham Mertz had looked really, really good in both of them, and we weren't exactly sure how Wisconsin would fare against the defense that was as good as Northwestern. We weren't sure how Northwestern would fare against the defense that was as good as Wisconsin. But, I think the first few quarters were kind of what we've seen from Northwestern this year, which is a lot of like really good performances on the defensive end, but kind of a slow start on the offensive end. But as I'm sure we'll talk about, there's Peyton Ramsey went on a drive midway through the second quarter, and that was where Northwestern scored on a Ramon Chiogo-Bowman touchdown, and that was what put Northwestern ahead. But that play specifically was one that we haven't seen Northwestern do, or that drive specifically, wasn't one that we have seen Northwestern do too much of this year. It's so much of Northwestern's program, or just ethos, I guess, is really good defensive plays. The defense will win the games, and then the offense will do just enough to kind of keep the team in the game, or, do what it needs to do. But that was the first time I would honestly say one of the first times we've seen all season in which, the Northwestern offense really came to play and looked as good as its offense, or looked as good as its defense did. So I think that was just there was kind of like the pregame energy shift, and then that post-scoring drive energy shift that kind of just like sealed it away. And we all looked at each other in the press box and we're like, okay, this team is for real,
Yeah. So you thought the Northwestern offense on Saturday was to par or one of the best games of the season for the offense specifically?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the statistics, the running game wasn't great. The best Northwestern's best offensive game probably so far was its opener against Maryland. I mean, scoring 43 points and beating a team by 40 is going to be a good offensive performance nonetheless. But Maryland's defense was nowhere near the caliber of Wisconsin's defense. And Northwestern in its 5 games so far has had, a number of games where Peyton Ramsey looks really good throwing the ball in the air, as he did against Maryland and Purdue, or in other games, Northwestern is nearly entirely dependent on its run game, which is what happened against Iowa in week 2. But I think this game, and, you know, Northwestern's running game didn't really have anything to do, or I think they only finished with around 24, 25 rushing yards in the whole game against Wisconsin. But Peyton Ramsey looked really comfortable and experienced and was able to do enough to do more than enough, in my opinion, to get Northwestern past that finish line. You know, in its previous games, and especially in the first and second quarter of that game against Wisconsin, Northwestern has really struggled for its offense to capitalize on the opportunities that its defense gives them. So, you know, its defense can force a turnover, its defense can force an interception or a fumble, but its offense will get out there and either turn the ball over itself or just go to a quick 3 or 4 and out. And I think this was the first game, really specifically, like leading back to that scoring drive that I mentioned earlier, in which Northwestern's offense was able to get the job done, make some long passes, and I don't know, do more than enough, I guess, to secure a win against one of the country's top defenses.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it. Maryland was that season opener, kind of an abnormality, so to speak. They won 43-3, and then it was kind of back to the Northwestern ethos. I thought that was a great turn that you put there, because that is kind of Northwestern football each and every year. They kind of just grind out these really close defensive battles and just have to find a way to win. Cardiac Cats, whether it's from behind or just holding on like they did in Iowa when they obviously came back and then they held on by 1. I think they were up by 1 for, you know, early third quarter on type thing. But this year it seems that Northwestern has a knack for being able to get drives when they need it. You know, they had many 3 and outs in the second half. I think they had 7 3 and outs in the second half. But they're able to put together drives when they need it, which seem to come either at the beginning of each half or right at the end of each half. Why do you think that's the case? I know that you know, Peyton Ramsey had said that, you know, the offense kind of feels when they, you know, during the game, they feel when they need to put a drive together like that. Is it just a matter of like, hey, like this is go time for us?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think if you look at a lot of the opening quarter drives that Northwestern puts together, usually at like the start of a second quarter or the start of a fourth quarter, those drives, and that's not, I don't think, specific to this year. Northwestern has always been really good about, you know, coming out of a halftime break or coming out of a quarter break and, you know, starting really strong on a drive. And I think that's something kind of ingrained in the program longer before, you know, Peyton Ramsey got here, Mike Bujagian got here. I can think of a number of Northwestern games in which that's happened in my head. But I think this offense specifically, just with the injection of new life that it got from Peyton Ramsey transferring in from Indiana and Mike Bujagian coming in as offensive coordinator from Boston College this year, I think when you look at the freshness and the new ideas that having those 2 new personnel in this offense brought, I think, you know, that's part of the reason why the offense just looks different, like 10,000 times different than it did last year, and even different than it did in the, you know, like earlier in the Clayton Thorson, Justin Jackson eras. Yeah. This offense is much more apt to like using different kinds or going through different types of like tempo and style and speed. So, you know, if you look at the time lengths of their offensive drives this year, they have a bunch that have, you know, stretched on for 5 or 6 minutes, and then a bunch when they can figure out a way to score in 90 seconds. So I think that's like, you know, just a product of having some new offensive energy in their scheme.
Yeah. And sticking with the offense, how good is Peyton Ramsey, you know, when you look forward down the road for the rest of the season, and then potentially it's not official yet, but everybody kind of knows what's maybe looming in the future for Northwestern. You know, what's your confidence level that Peyton Ramsey can go out and continue to perform not only as he has, but elevate his game when he faces even bigger opponents?
Yeah, I think this Wisconsin game was a really good measure for that. We've seen, I don't think Peyton Ramsey, other than obviously everyone is kind of looking at the Maryland game as the one outlier in Northwestern season so far, just because, you know, opening start of the season, the Maryland defense isn't very good. There's not too much to super read into that, but especially how Peyton Ramsey, has played against defenses like Iowa and Purdue and especially Wisconsin. I've been personally really impressed by what he's been able to do. He's incredibly consistent in his plays and what he's able to do, kind of grinding out just this like short yardage throws and quarterback draws when they're necessary. And I think the Wisconsin game was probably, looking at the rest of Northwestern's schedule especially too, the Wisconsin game was the biggest barometer of his success that we can read against how he would play against maybe an Ohio State defense down the line, whatever Northwestern would play in a bowl down the line. And the fact that he was able to throw for 200 plus yards against Wisconsin's defense, I think it's really impressive and says a lot. And the fact that he has 4 years of Big Ten experience playing against, all these teams in the Big Ten, playing against Big Ten East opponents, which would hopefully do Northwestern well in a Big Ten championship game scenario if that happens down the line. I think Northwestern is really comfortable with Peyton Ramsey as their quarterback right now, and just the levels of consistency and experience that he brings to this program that it most certainly did not have at all in 2019.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they ran through four quarterbacks in 2019 there. Obviously a real weakness for the Wildcats. Transitioning to the run game, obviously it wasn't there against Wisconsin. Wisconsin, very good defense. That's historically the case with the Badgers. But it was their second straight game rushing under 100 yards. I think 80 against Purdue and then 24, like you mentioned, against Wisconsin. But they had a good rushing attack against Iowa, especially when Peyton Ramsey wasn't playing well. So is it just a matter of putting the pieces together and having a game where it all clicks, or what do you see needs to be improved for the rushing attack?
Yeah, I think Pat Fitzgerald has kind of echoed that in his last few weeks press conferences. He says that specifically on the offensive end, I guess as a whole, the program has yet to play a complete game. And specifically on the offensive end, there has yet to be, other than that Maryland game aside, at least against its Big Ten West opponents, there has yet to be a game in which, the passing game has a really good performance, and then the running game also shows that too. So I think, Isaiah Bowser is Northwestern's first string running backs, and he's battled some injuries throughout this year. He was kind of beat up on his shoulder after that Iowa performance, in which he had a really good game and kind of was the focus and focal point of Northwestern's attack, but he was pretty beat up after that one. So he didn't play against Nebraska. And I think he's been slowly easing back into being Northwestern's first string running backs. But I mean, you look at the Wisconsin game, and they had Bowser in there for a little bit. They had Drake Anderson, who is definitely more of a lateral runner rather than the downhill rusher that what's his name, Isaiah Bowser is. They had, Evan Hull, Cam Porter, Kyrick McGowan, who's traditionally a wide receiver, is taking a lot of carries as well. So I think Northwestern's still trying to find, especially with Bowser still kind of recovering from that injury, and he battled a lot of injuries in 2019 as well. Northwestern's still kind of trying to find the right balance in which how many attempts should we give Bowser, how much should we give Anderson. And I don't think it's a commentary at all on Northwestern's offensive line. I've been really impressed with the O-line and how they've been able to create time for Peyton Ramsey when he wants to throw in the pocket. And especially in that Iowa game, we were all really impressed with how the offensive line was able to kind of create opportunities for that run game. I think it's just a matter of finding the best balance between the different rushers and the different strengths and skills that Northwestern does have. And I'm sure, especially in these next three games that aren't against defenses that are at the caliber of Wisconsin's, we might be able to see Northwestern kind of try to fine tune that run game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Bowser didn't play much after his fumble at the goal line. Was that kind of sitting out benching scenario, or was it more like he just wasn't healthy enough to stay in the game and they were going to go with a different route?
I don't know. I can't speak fully on that. He didn't play a lot after that first fumble. I think Northwestern, even before that fumble, or there hadn't been that many plays, but Northwestern was trying for more options of Kyrick McGowan and Drake Anderson, who are definitely more speed-focused, quicker runners who were trying to kind of go horizontally around Wisconsin's defensive line rather than try to push through them. And maybe Bowser, with still recovering from that shoulder injury that he suffered and kind of the other injury that he's been beat up with throughout the whole season. Maybe it just wasn't a strategic choice to kind of throw him into the pit against the Wisconsin D-line, but I don't know. I'm interested to see what happens with that run game. I think we'll probably continue to see more of Drake Anderson, more of a true freshman Cam Porter, who had some nice runs. So I think Bowser will definitely be integrated into that, but I don't know if we'll see kind of the run game be as fully oriented around him as like its leader or its main focal point as it was in 2019 or even 2018 before that.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. And maybe, the coaches saw kind of the writing on the wall so early on in the game of, hey, we're just not going to be able to run the ball effectively against these guys. We're going to have to go a different route. So that will be interesting to see how they fine tune the running game because at least from watching, I think they'll need that moving forward. That was the only turnover of the game for Northwestern. Wisconsin, of course, had 5 turnovers. So looking at the Northwestern defense, which has obviously been their strength the entire season and historically been Northwestern's strength, 5 turnovers for the Badgers, and still, Mertz is still a freshman, right? Redshirt freshman, so that was probably the biggest game of and toughest environment that he's probably had to play in. But 5 turnovers forced, I think 5 sacks. They forced 7 punts and then 2 turnovers on downs. So was that basically kind of how you expected the game to go from Northwestern defensive standpoint?
I mean, yeah, Northwestern's defense, as I mentioned before, is always kind of the foundation around which the rest of its team is built. But I think especially this year, this is one of the top defenses in the country, if not probably a top 5 defense in my opinion. And I think you saw exactly why on Saturday. The secondary has, and I've kind of said this as I've been talking about Northwestern season before. Northwestern secondary in the last 3 years that I've been covering them has always been showed really great promise in the start of the season, but then really battled injuries throughout down the stretch. So it's been hard to get a solid read on them. But I think this year, especially, to have a player like redshirt freshman defensive back Brandon Joseph, who has 5 interceptions on his own already, I think we're really starting to see a full complete season of Greg Newsome, who has battled a lot of injuries as a freshman and a sophomore. So we haven't really seen his full potential. And, he got his first career interception against Wisconsin. And it kind of was like, it took him that long. Like he didn't get that already because he's just in such the circle. But, the secondary is so impressive. The linebackers, in my opinion, are probably one of the best linebacking trios in the country. Patty Fisher, Blake Gallagher, Chris Bergen, they've been playing together as a trio of that group for the past, this is their 3rd season now, and they're just looking better and better each game. Even the front defensive line, I think Eku Leota had 2 sacks again, or 1 or 2 sacks against Wisconsin, and he's been one of the real breakout players of this season on that defensive front 7. And I just think from the secondary all the way up to the line, Northwestern's defense is just looking so strong as usual, and to do that against an offense that coming in had been as highly touted as Wisconsin's was, especially with Mertz, was just really impressive to see.
Yeah, and Mertz definitely had some freshman mistakes in there as well, but the defense, smothered him. There was a reason for that. He did hit the big pass play over the top, that touchdown that right after the fumble, 14-point swing where it's like, hey, if he just hits, 1 in the second half, they're in the game effectively. Were you surprised in the second half when Wisconsin went for it on that 4th and 6? I think there was plenty of time in the 4th quarter, like maybe 10 minutes or so, and they decided to go for it on 4th and 6, down 14-7. But they could have maybe kicked a field goal there. Were you surprised at that decision?
Yeah, I was pretty surprised. I think that had just come off the 3rd quarter that saw maybe 9 or 10 straight punts in a row. So between the 2 teams, so it was definitely a quite a way to start off the 4th quarter and be like, oh, they're going for it with like you said, around 10 minutes to go. I don't know. I guess I think that the whole turnover on downs situation that happened in the 4th was just another example of how strong this Northwestern defense is. To force them into a situation to force Wisconsin into a situation in which it would choose Graham Mertz's or its faith in Graham Mertz's arm or its offense's throwing potential as opposed to, going for a field goal try. But I think, to focus the conversation back onto Northwestern, I think it just showed that play specifically was another just example of how strong this Northwestern defense is.
Yeah, and it was a perfectly executed blitz call by Mike Hankiewicz.
Yeah.
So obviously it was perfect blitz call. It wasn't a 4th and 1, which the Badgers picked up a couple of those. It was a 4th and 6, which is why it was kind of weird to me. But kind of brought the house, sacked them, and then Northwestern was able to, thanks to a pass interference penalty, kind of get a drive going and kick a field goal. And then that was kind of all she wrote a little bit. Let me just let you brag on the defensive coordinator for Northwestern real quick. I know that's what that's what Coach Fitz wanted after the game, and you've been around the program a lot longer. You're the expert here, so I just thought I'd let you brag on the defensive coordinator, the guy.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Hankiewicz is just an incredible offensive coordinator. I think, or defensive coordinator, excuse me. I think in my opinion, he should be in consideration for the Broyles Award this year. But this is really nothing new. There's a reason why he has 398 wins as an assistant, and he's been coaching since, coaching quite literally since the 70s. And I think Northwestern just has such faith in him as a defensive coordinator for what he's been able to do over the last 10 plus years, and what he's showing right now is nothing new opposed to that. We were talking in the press conference yesterday to a number of defensive players who were asking for and some reporters were asking for everyone's kind of best Mike Hankiewicz story. And there's no flashy Mike Hankiewicz anecdote because he's just kind of down to business. He's, he's incredibly consistent in what he's able to do with his defense. He's very clear with what he wants. I remember sitting in the press conferences this summer, and when we asked him exactly what the defense needed to do, because the defense wasn't bad in 2019, Northwestern's kind of 3-9 record was more the product of dire offensive struggles than it was because of things on the defensive end. But I remember sitting in a press conference in July, and Mike Hankiewicz was like, we just need to get more takeaways, and then we'll be kind of the sound, complete defense that we want. And you look at where Northwestern is in terms of the takeaways it's been able to get, whether that's fumbles or interceptions through 5 games this season. He's very clear about what he wants. And when he can get his defense to play up to that level, this is the product of it. It's a top 5 defense in the country,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of where they are. And you mentioned, so that's obviously Northwestern has a road ahead. Michigan State, so at East Lansing, at Minnesota, and then hosting Illinois. Michigan State's beating Michigan, who's again not very good. Minnesota just beat Purdue, where you had that phantom pass interference call, and then Illinois kind of ran it up on Nebraska there. Is there anywhere that you look in the rest of the schedule where you should be concerned, that you would be concerned of a trip up game?
I think all three, this is this is the Big Ten West, and like you just mentioned, with all the previous results in this incredibly wonky year already, all 3 of those could be trip up games in my opinion. Especially against Minnesota, and probably less so Illinois, but Minnesota I think would be the most likely of those to be a trip up game. But I honestly think that Northwestern could not have wished for a better schedule for its last 3 games. It from the start of this season, when the shortened schedule came out, everyone kind of looked at it and said, okay, it's the 2 ones you really have to circle on your calendar are going to be this Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota stretch. And obviously, Iowa and Minnesota haven't exactly lived up to those preseason expectations that everyone had for them. And to be in this position, of this 5-0 position at this point in the season, I think is just really beneficial to Northwestern. Northwestern is a program, if you look at its schedule in the last 5 years, traditionally the Wildcats would kind of struggle in their non-conference games, usually drop 1 or 2 openers, or one or two early games in the season, and then kind of rebound down the stretch. I remember my freshman or sophomore year, they went on to win at least 7 of their last games. So this is a Northwestern program that traditionally plays better down the stretch. Obviously, you didn't see that last year, but I mean, you could have. By the way, they beat Illinois in that final game, but
good point. Yep.
This Northwestern, I think Northwestern is trained in its DNA to play better in tough road environments in the middle of November weather in the Big Ten West. In the Big Ten West and the Midwest in general. So I think Northwestern is kind of exactly where it wants to be at this point. And, those games are, Minnesota's always going to be a trip up game, just going all the way up there and playing there. But I think Northwestern is in a really favorable position, just kind of based on where it is this year and based on looking at how it plays games down the stretch in the past.
Sure, absolutely. And if they can win out, then they have a chance, an opportunity to get, to Pasadena, take the purple to Pasadena for the college football playoff. More than likely, they would have to beat Ohio State. I'm not sure, were you at the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis a couple years back?
I was, yeah.
Okay, so taking from what you saw there and that team kind of, Ohio State's very similar powerhouse. Northwestern seems like a very similar defensive team. It might be just a similar matchup with different names on the jerseys. What would they have to do in order to, win a game like that?
Yeah, I think if you look at Northwestern's track record against Ohio State last year, there was obviously the shellacking in Evanston. That was, I think the final score was 52-3 or something. So that's obviously not a huge one to look into. But honestly, if you look back to the Big Ten championship game from 2018, obviously Ohio State ended up winning it, and kind of Dwayne Haskins just put on a lights out performance to do that. But Northwestern was still in that game as late as the late third quarter. That's kind of when I mentioned before that Northwestern has a habit of coming out of a halftime break and then just putting on a show in a third quarter. That's exactly what they did in the Big Ten championship game. They scored, I can't remember how many points, but at least 2 touchdowns in that third quarter. And then they did the same thing a few weeks later in the Holiday Bowl, coming out with another really strong third quarter. So I think Northwestern can play against a team like Ohio State and keep it a close game. I think this year, there's only so much that we can read into the last 5 games to make a declarative statement on how this 2020 Northwestern team lines up to the 2018 team that also made it to the Big Ten championship game. And I think Pat Fitzgerald said that openly in his press conferences this week, that it was just a little too early to do any of those kind of close readings. But I think the signs are in the signs we've seen from Northwestern would be in its favor for at least being able to have a close game against a team like Ohio State. What we've seen from the defense so far has just looked incredibly strong. And this is kind of a lot of the same pieces of the same defense that were playing in that 2018 game, especially in terms of those 3 linebackers. And now that they have 2 more years of experience, I'm sure that wouldn't hurt. And having a quarterback who's on his 5th year of playing in the Big Ten, I'm sure wouldn't hurt either. I think it's just about it. And adding all on top of that a team like Ohio State, as we saw last week again when they played Indiana, isn't kind of as impregnable as it has been in years past. So I think, I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying that I think a Northwestern team could compete against an Ohio State in a Big Ten championship game scenario.
Yeah, the Buckeyes certainly aren't bulletproof. That they showed that against Indiana for sure. Just had some kind of rapid fire questions for you here, Ella.
Sure.
Obviously you're a senior across your time at Northwestern. What's your favorite memory, kind of a football memory, and then also kind of just a general Northwestern memory?
That's a great question. Okay, so I think my favorite football memory probably has to be that 2018 Holiday Bowl. We had that was my first year covering football for the Daily, so I picked a really great year for it to happen in 2018. So I kind of had, up to that point, had gotten to travel literally all around the country, from New Jersey to watching them play Rutgers to Iowa and Minnesota, and then to Indianapolis, of course, and then to kind of end that season at the Holiday Bowl in the pouring rain with that insane comeback win against Utah was definitely kind of the icing on the cake of that whole season. And, just thinking back to, during the final moments of that game, we all kind of ran down from the press box in San Diego's open air stadium, and we're kind of waiting on the field. And, just grabbed different Northwestern players in these huge media scrums in the middle of the pouring rain on the field. And especially in these COVID times, like that wouldn't happen no matter what this year. So to, I don't know, to kind of think of those memories are very fun. And then I think outside of football, I have gotten to do so many cool things with the Daily over the last few years. My freshman year, I got to cover the 1 year when the Big Ten men's basketball tournament was in New York City. I got to come back to New York City for that and cover Northwestern's game at Madison Square Garden, which was a complete career highlight, and that was really awesome. And then my sophomore year, Northwestern's women's lacrosse team, which was one of the first programs that I covered at Northwestern, advanced to a Final Four, so I got to go to Maryland for that. So I've been very lucky these last few years to have an opportunity to kind of really travel around and see some really cool Northwestern sporting events.
Yeah, obviously that's great. Cover at the Garden, San Diego, the Holiday Bowl. I have to ask, was it raining by the time you were on the field? Was it still pouring down rains? Cats and dogs.
Yeah, so it had started. The whole season had been like, if we get to go to a bowl in California, like we'll have such nice weather after braving it through, like snow in the middle of October, kind of like all this Big Ten-y Midwest weather. And then we got to San Diego. It was pretty nice weather, like kind of just overcast for the first quarter. And then in the second quarter and the third quarter is when like the rain just came pouring down. And, that was one of the last years for San Diego's old Qualcomm Stadium, SDCCU stadium. And the whole stadium was built in like 1960. So the whole press box is all open air, which is not great when you have your very expensive computer that you're writing your game story on and it starts to rain. So we kind of took all of the different stat sheets that we were getting and made this big row. All of us Northwestern reporters made this big row of like flip cards to try to cover our laptops. And then it was still pouring rain by the end of the day. So or by the end of the game. So kind of all the pictures I have from then are of me downpouring, or it's still downpouring, it's still soaking raining. But it was an incredible memory and an incredible moment. Yeah.
I can't even imagine just being on the field, just being doused in rain. That's just nuts. But obviously it was a great win, comeback victory, like you said. And then of course you mentioned, covering the women's lacrosse team. I've kind of lost count of how many national championships they've accumulated, but at least 7.
Yep, 7's the number. Yep.
I was right. Well, that's awesome. Next question, you kind of have created a little niche in covering the Wildcats. You're kind of like the uniform queen of kind of tracking the uniforms, the combo helmet, shirts, and pants. A lot of people love to do that and love tracking the uniforms. What made you kind of want to do that for Northwestern, and how did that evolve?
Yeah, for sure. It's now that you're one of the few people I've recounted this like origin story to in the last few days, and now it's kind of funny to think back about how it started. So Northwestern is on the quarter system, which means that it does like 3 quarters instead of 2 semesters for the academic year. So my freshman year didn't start until like September 25th. So I was kind of like stuck at home. That 2017 season, I watched like the first 4 Northwestern games from my couch in New Jersey, and I was sitting there before their season opener in 2017 against Nevada, and I was like, I noticed their uniforms, and I've always just been like fascinated, like interested and liked different uniforms in different sports, and I was like, I wonder how I wish there was a great origin story like to base my curiosity around, but it really just was like, I'm curious as to how like they've played in this uniform combo before. So then I kind of spent the next few weeks before I went back to school just like pouring through these old pictures of Northwestern's uniforms and kind of trying to find their records in each game, and just like a very niche project to cure my boredom before I went to start my freshman year of college. And I remember like sitting on my couch and I had like tweeted it out, and I didn't have a Northwestern following at all or anything at that point, and I saw that like the Northwestern main football account like liked my tweet about when I like first published my uniform spreadsheet, and I was like, wow, I've like truly made it. And now 4 years later, there's a whole section in the Northwestern game notes about where to look for tracking my whole uniform combination record chart. So we really have come a far way, and I'm so surprised that as many people are interested in them as they are, but I'm happy they are.
Yeah, so in your house in New Jersey, watching the 2017 game against Nevada. Is that right?
Yep, that's where it all began.
Yeah. Well, that's very fascinating. What's your favorite uniform combo that the Cats have? They've experimented, over the past couple of years with different styles, and curious to know what.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm usually a fan of. I'm a big fan of the all whites. I just think they look really clean, and Northwestern has played really well in some of its games where it's worn the all white uniforms in the past. So those are fun. But I think the combo that it wore at Wisconsin actually was one of my favorites. The purple jersey, white pants, and purple helmet. Northwestern doesn't have I think their record all time is only 3-4, but I think, I love the purple top. I just think purple is a very unique color in college football, especially. And I like whenever they can spotlight that. And I just like the kind of combo that it lends itself to. So that's one of my favorite combos there.
Yeah. Is there one that you like the least, or one that you're like, we could probably do without that one in the rotation?
I'm kind of glad, and I think a lot of Northwestern fans will agree with me, because whenever I used to tweet out about the gray uniforms, they would always be like, we need to get rid of the grays immediately. So my first 2 years, my freshman and sophomore year, so 2017, 2018, Northwestern wore a lot of grays. So they would kind of, the gray jersey with just a little hint of purple, and then black pants and a black helmet was a super popular combination for a while. And that just did not sit well with the Northwestern fans, who were demanding more purple. And, I'm a fan of the purple myself. So, but it seems as in the last year or so, they've started to kind of transition away from the gray. So I think, I guess a lot of Northwestern fans are happy about that.
Yeah, that's the same. I kind of like the purple myself. Definitely the helmets, and I think they wore that combination in the Big Ten championship game. I can't remember the color of the pants, but and then I would say I'm probably not a big fan of the Gothic uniforms. I'm not sure what
the Gothic, I will say, are not my favorite in football. I own one of the Gothic the Gothic football jerseys too, but just because I had to. That was one of the first things I bought when I got into Northwestern. I was like, I really liked watching it on the screen, but I think the Gothic definitely lends itself better to Northwestern's men's and women's basketball uniforms. Their Gothic uniforms are really cool and look really great in kind of the sleek down Northwestern basketball version. But I think the Gothics have a cool, when they first came out in 2014 or 15, I think they were definitely hot for a second, but I definitely prefer them in basketball rather than football.
For sure. That's fair enough. Absolutely. Have you ever tapped or touched the Trust Yourself board?
I have not. That if we weren't living in COVID times, that would be on my bucket list, or on my Northwestern bucket list. But I think they have some equivalent of it hanging right above kind of the tunnel entrance into Ryan Field. So maybe when I get back to Evanston in winter and spring, that'll be one of the last things I cross off on my Northwestern bucket list.
Sure, absolutely. And you mentioned COVID times, crazy times. What was that experience like, in the preseason? Big Ten announces the cancellation of all fall sports, including football, after they released a modified schedule. And then all the other conferences are like, no, we're still going to play. And then it took a while, and Big Ten was like, all right, we'll reverse our decision. And now we're playing. And Northwestern has zero positive tests this year, right? As they would say, probably knock on wood on that, but that's an outstanding accomplishment, number one. But what was that journey like?
Yeah, it was definitely a hectic month of August. And, I wasn't, but it was a lot of, me just spending a lot of time on Twitter, refreshing Nicole Auerbach's feeds, waiting for the latest Big Ten news. Yeah, but it was definitely hectic. I think that the month of August was, from the Northwestern perspective, was really crazy too. Kind of a mix of the Big Ten, putting out a schedule, then changing its course. Then there was a moment in, I think, early August, in which Northwestern thought it had to shut down all practices because they thought they had one positive case, and then it ended up being a false positive. So that was like a hectic span of 7 hours to cover that. And then, once I got back to school in September, the Big Ten just being like, yeah, we're starting up again. And, Northwestern's president, Morton Shapiro, is like the head of the Big Ten's Council of Presidents and Chancellors. So, we were kind of hearing some things from him. And so in addition to the kind of like big Big Ten picture, it was kind of strange to follow that at Northwestern as well, because Northwestern, for this past fall quarter that's just wrapping up now, only half of its student body was on campus or was allowed to even come back to Evanston. So no freshmen and no sophomores, unless you were like athletes or had an exception, were allowed to come back and live on campus. So it was a really quiet semester quarter in Evanston, and kind of dealing with all the changes that had been made on, the Northwestern University specific side to the quarter, as well as all the changes happening in the Big Ten were a lot to manage. But I guess I'm glad that we're at this point now where we're kind of past that.
Sure, absolutely. And then as president of the the Association for Women in Sports Media, what are you proudest of that you've done in that chapter, in that organization?
Yeah, for sure. I've been a member of Awesome at Northwestern since I was a freshman, and I've had so many incredible opportunities to meet people at the events that we host, and just find that community of other women in sports media at this school. But I think this last quarter, especially, in which I'm one of the presidents of the org, has been by far, and being able to work on it in executive board capacity, kind of putting on these events and recruiting new people to join, has been one of my most rewarding experiences. And I think my career highlight my Awesome at NU highlight so far was I tweeted about it on Saturday, but on Saturday against Wisconsin, myself, Leah, the other Awesome at NU president, and then our vice president Claire were all covering the game against Wisconsin, which was the first time that our full Awesome exec board had been all covering one of the most consequential games in college football that weekend and in person together. So that was, and after 4 years at Northwestern, where I've had a lot of instances, where I'd walk into a press box and I'd be the only woman in it, to be alongside two of my best friends who are also, working in sports journalism, and also women in sports journalism, covering this very huge, important game, was just a real career highlight, I guess.
That's awesome. And you'll graduate from the Medill School this spring, and then are you going to be working with the Post, the Washington Post?
Yep. So I was slated to work at the Post, or to intern at the Post last summer, and then because it was kind of in the height of the COVID stuff, they called off their internship program. So I will be there next summer as a sports editing intern, which is really exciting. So
wow, that's super exciting. Of course, Mike Fun, and he has some
yes, there's a lot of Northwestern alumni or Northwestern Medill alumni specifically, who have kind of started their greater careers in journalism at the Post. I'm very, very excited to kind of get to join that cohort a little.
Absolutely. I grew up in Virginia, so
awesome.
Reading the Post fairly regularly growing up. So
very excited to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congrats to you for that. That should be a lot of fun, a lot of great experience. Thank you so much for coming on and joining me in the lounge, talking some Northwestern football. Ella, I really, really appreciate it. Just real quick, where can everybody find you, your work, out there on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. So I will be at the Daily Northwestern through the rest of the season to kind of wrap up my daily career. So you can find all of our football coverage at dailynorthwestern.com. And then if you are on Twitter, you can find me at Ella Brockway. I tweet a lot about Northwestern sports, a lot about soccer, a lot about uniforms across all sports. So you can definitely find me at all those places. Yep.
Sure. Well, thank you again. I really
thank you so much for having me. I had a great time talking with you.
Me too.